In this video, I'm going to go over one of the most important formatting concepts that you need to know for investment banking and finance when using Excel, and that's how to create your own custom number formats. So if you remember in the first video, when we pressed the Control-1 combination, we saw under number there were a couple different categories here, from general to number to currency, accounting, and so on. And for the most part, these are okay because most of the time we're using things like percentages, or we just want to display a number with a dollar sign with a couple decimal places after it. But they don't always work. Sometimes these are a bit limiting, and we need to have our own custom formats because really all these formats let us do is change the alignment, change the number of decimal places, and change the symbol that's in front of some of the numbers. So if we want to do more than that, for example, if we want to color code numbers based on their values, or if we want to display an error message if there's a certain value, or an OK message if there's another value, then we can't do that with just the built-in format. So we need to go to some of the custom formats that we see down here. And just use the mouse to just scroll through these. We see a couple of the ones here, and these may not make too much sense to you because they probably look a little bit complicated, but I'll go through the basic concept and some examples of how we use them. And to teach this part, I'm going to show you 4 examples of how we might use custom number formats. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is actually really, really important to have a good handle on this because you'll end up doing it all the time. There are a couple areas where you use it more frequently, and that's what I'm going to focus on, but it's really important to understand this for when you actually start working in investment banking. So I'm going to close out of this, and now I'm going to go over to one of the files that should be included on this page, which is the valuation template. I'm going to go over there and show you a quick example of how we might actually use these custom number formats in a real-world scenario. Okay, so here we are in our valuation template. This is on the public company comparables page. And if you haven't made it this far in the course, don't worry. The actual content that's here is not that important. The important part is the formatting, which is what we're going to do right now because that's what we're teaching here. And so we see a couple different criteria up here and a couple different sets of information: revenue, EBITDA, profitability for each of these companies. But what I want to draw your attention to is what's on the bottom here. And you see that some of these numbers have an X after them, these multiples have an X after them, but then the ones up here in this area do not. And what we're going to do now is fix that. And this is probably one of the most commonly used custom number formats within Excel in the world of finance. So I'm going to show you how to add an X after your numbers, after your multiples now, because again, this is something that you'll do all the time as an analyst. And it's not just limited to public company comparables and precedent transactions where you do this. It's actually used all over the place in other formulas and other types of models. So it's important to at least have a basic idea of how to set this up. So as always, the first thing we'll do is select this whole area with Control, Shift, and the arrow keys. Then I'll press Control-1 and Alt-C to go to Category, and then I'll press C to go down to Currency, and then C again to go to Custom. And I'm just going to use the mouse here to scroll up and down in this box. There are a lot of different custom number formats right here, but what I want to do is fairly simple, and it's something that sometimes actually comes included with Excel. So here's how we set up this custom number format. The basic method that we use for this is as follows. So we can press Alt-T to go to Type right here. First, we define what happens when we have a positive number. So we can just say 0.00, for example. Then we put a semicolon. And then the next part of the equation is what happens when we have a negative number. So maybe we'll put that in parentheses with 2 decimal places. And then the third part is what happens when we have a 0 for our number. So maybe in that case, we'll just have a dash symbol or something of that nature. And then the fourth part is what happens when we have text. So if that were the case here, it wouldn't really make any sense, but just for comparison purposes, we might say text or something like that. So that's the basic order for custom number formats. The first part before the first semicolon is for a positive number. The second part before the next semicolon is for a negative number. The third part is what happens when you have a 0. And then the fourth part is what happens when you have text. Now, as you can imagine, we hardly ever actually see all these together because there are hardly any cells that actually could be all these. For the most part, they're either going to be positive or negative numbers. You're going to be checking for a 0 value, or it's just going to be text. So this is how you could potentially do it, but you hardly ever actually use it this way. And let me show you the actual way that you might use it right now to set up these multiples. So we're not going to worry about text because you can see from the formulas we're dividing enterprise value by revenue or EBITDA here. So clearly we're not going to get a text value. And we're probably not going to get a zero value unless we have something odd going on. We have a zero enterprise value or something like that. I will come back to this later and just focus on the first parts for right now. And so here's what we're going to do. We'll go to the first value, and when it's a positive number, it's pretty simple. We just write 0.0 with a space and then x right after it. Now, when it's a negative value, we could potentially just put it in parentheses or color it red or something of that nature, but it's actually a better idea in this case to label it not meaningful, which in investment banking we usually just abbreviate as NM. And same for zero. If we have a zero value for a multiple, it's really telling us that it's not meaningful. So that's how we'd set that one up. When it's a positive multiple, we want the number followed by a space followed by the x. If it's negative, we want not meaningful, and if it's zero, we also want not meaningful. So let's just press enter and see what happens there. Okay, so this looks much better already, and now just to test whether or not this custom number format worked, let's just enter a negative number right here. Okay, so it's displaying as not meaningful, which is exactly what we want. Now let's enter a 0 to verify that that works, and that works as well. So whenever you set up a custom number format like this, you should always be checking it with the numbers right afterward to make sure everything works properly. But in this case it does, so we're done with this file for now, and everything is set up properly here. If we wanted to, we could also color this differently. We might color the positive ones blue, for example, and I've seen that done in some demonstrations of this, but to be honest, it's actually a little annoying and weird to color the multiples blue here, and you hardly ever actually see that done in investment banking. Almost always the entire row here is black or at least the same color. So it's a little odd to do that. We could do it, but we'll get into how to color code things in the next part of this tutorial. And then one of the other common uses for this custom number format is to modify the built-in format slightly in Excel to do different things. So one really common example for this is on our accounting sheet here, the very simple three-statement model that we have in this course. What we can do here is change it so that we see here that the negative numbers are in parentheses, but we can actually change it and make it so the negative numbers are red as well. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So first let's press Control 1 and then C to go to custom. And we see that actually this accounting style is a custom format itself within Excel. And this actually reduces the amount of work we have to do because it's all defined. All we're going to do here is just modify this built-in custom style and just add a color in front of the negative one. So press tab to get over there. And we see here that the positive one is defined this way. And basically all this is doing is just telling Excel that it should be aligned with one space to the right here, as well as one leading space to the left. Then there should be a dollar sign, and then there should be one decimal place. So that's all the syntax here is doing. What we're going to do is change the negative one, and to color code it, we can add red in brackets right here. So this will have the effect of making, whenever we have a positive one, it'll be black, the default color. Whenever it's negative, it'll retain the same style, except it'll be red now. And then whenever we have a 0, it'll just be the dash. And then text will just be displayed as text in parentheses. So that's how we would modify a built-in style. And this is very common to do, especially for accounting purposes like this. So we'll just hit enter here. We don't see any changes because this is a positive number. So let's just press Control C and then copy this to a couple other places. I'm just pressing Alt EST to copy. As we'd expect, this one is now turned to red. So let's go through now and just make sure the style appears across all the different cells that use this in Excel. So I'm just going through and copying and pasting the different styles here. This would be much easier, by the way, if everything were listed together. It's not done that way because I want to keep this simple and make all the lines easy to see for that tutorial. But nevertheless, it would be a lot easier if it were like that. Okay, and again, we have negatives here, so that shows up differently. Negatives there, so that shows up differently. And basically this just lets us see more easily what's actually going on here because now the negatives really stand out and jump out at you. It's not terribly useful in a three-statement model because we expect to have negatives, but if we had a data set where, for example, we didn't expect any negatives, it was all supposed to be positive, then it would help us locate the errors or figure out which ones are problematic very quickly. And so that's how we change it within that. And if we want to be completely correct, we should also change all these $ ones too. So anything with a $ in front of it should also be changed here. I'm not going to bother with that for now because this exercise was just to show you how to change a very specific set of numbers, namely the ones that don't have the $ in front of them. Okay, so those are two of the most common uses for this custom number format in Excel. And I'm going to go down on this balance sheet and show you another really common use for custom number formats. And that is to do a balance sheet check. So I'm going to enter right here, balance sheet check. I'm just going to take assets, use Control arrow key to get up there quickly, and then subtract liabilities and equity. And then we can do the same thing over here. I'll just use Control arrow to get up quickly, and then subtract liabilities and equity. And basically what we want to do here is make sure that our balance sheet actually balances. And the way to do that is by subtracting the liabilities and shareholders' equity side from the assets side. So here's how we're going to set up the custom number format. We'll press Control 1, then Alt C to go to category, then C to go to custom. And for the type, when it's positive, if it's positive here, that's actually an error. So we're going to say error. If it is negative, then that's also an error because it means our balance sheets don't balance. But if it's 0, then it's okay. So that's how we're going to set up this format. And this is very common to do within balance sheets. Sometimes people like to leave the actual numbers in rather than printing error messages. So that's another way you could do it. But this is very, very common to do, especially when you have complex models, just to check that your balance sheets are balancing. So we'll hit enter. And as we'd expect, both these say OK because it balances. If we change this to 67, let's say, then this would turn into an error message, so it no longer balances. But that's the basics of how we would set it up. And the three examples I just went over are probably the most common uses of custom number formats within Excel. There are other uses and other ways that you could use this feature, but these are three of the most common and the three uses that you really need to know and the three that you'll probably use the most often when you're actually going through and working on models and also with data sets. So for the exercise now, let me skip back to our original sheet right here. The exercise is going to be pretty simple, and it involves the use of one of the custom number formats that I've not been over yet. And let me show you how to do that right now. So I'm going to change the name of each of these, and I'm going to call this one price, call this one quantity, call this one category. So we're basically missing the product in front of each of them now. To fix that, I'm going to press Shift to highlight these, then Control 1, go to category, then custom. And for type, I'm going to enter product in quotes. Whenever you have text when you're doing this, you need to enter quotes around it so it's interpreted properly. I'll enter a space and then I'll enter the @ symbol. And that'll put product in front of anything that I write with the text right afterward. With the @ symbol represents text here. Press enter, and now this is fixed. So this is very useful. For example, if we have a situation like this where we have a bunch of different criteria listed, we want one word in front of it. Sometimes at the top of a model, for example, we'll say analysis of company X. And if we just want to type in the company's name and have the analysis appear automatically, then that's another way we could do it. So for your exercise, I want you to imitate what I just did with Excel, where I entered custom number formats for these three cells. I'm going to undo what I did right now. Then you should pause the video and then just try to replicate exactly what I did with the original worksheet that I had, which looked like this. So pause the video right now, try to do it yourself, and then I'll walk you through it by giving you the exact shortcuts. Okay, good. So here's how we're going to do it. First, we'll start out in the product price cell. We'll just rename this to price. We'll just enter price right here. Press arrow to enter quantity right here. And then press arrow again to enter category right here. Now to highlight all these, we just go back and we press Shift, right arrow key, and then Control 1, Alt-C to go to category, C to go to currency, then C again to go to custom. And then for type, first Alt-T to get there, then I type product in quotes, space, and then the @ symbol. Okay, so there it is. So that's not too complicated. This is probably not the most commonly used function for custom number formats in Excel, but nevertheless, it can be useful depending on what you're doing. I would say the first three that we went over for multiples, for changing the colors depending on negatives or positives, and then the balance sheet check that we also went over are probably the more common uses, but nevertheless, all these are good to know, and they come up surprisingly frequently, so it's really important to have a good grasp of this. Next up, we're going to go over how you might clean up data. So how you actually fix this poorly formatted data, like the address category that we have right here. How do you fix this? How do you make this look better and easier to manipulate? And then we'll get into conditional formatting, and then finally how to print the data before getting into the more advanced topics.